The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Better Protein Summit. What protein should we be recommending to create better health for people and planet? With Ashley Koff RD and Kate Geoghegan RD. Today we hope to inform you, inspire you, and invite you to be part of the Better Protein conversation. There will be a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please send us any questions you may have via the chat box. For those who registered, you'll be receiving the slides and resources early next week. Right, over to you, Ashley and Kate.
Thank you so much, Matt, and welcome everyone. I am honored to be able to collaborate with Kate Geoghegan on this, my partner in crime, in terms of being able to explore different aspects of better nutrition, thinking about that connection between planetary health and personal health. So this is really just a privilege, and we're super excited to be able to share with you some resources and really expand this conversation. So thank you. We would not be able to do it without our sponsors, as well as our wonderful Matt, who just opened this up with his excellent British accent. It makes me feel like I have to step up my accent a little bit better here. So I'll do my best to make an Ohio accent sound lovely. But our sponsors came to the table for one very specific reason. They believe in helping all of us to be able to communicate what is better protein and how we can make it more accessible for everyone. And we're really lucky with this group because we have a range of proteins that people have been consuming for forever and know a great deal about, and there are still innovations in that space. And we also have things that are extremely new and are really at the forefront of many different aspects of both planetary health and personal health. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in and get us started. And you'll be hearing from Kate in a moment as we get kicked off. But from a housekeeping standpoint, for all of you who are attending live today, and for the dietitians who were seeking to get the 1.5 CPE credits, you will receive an email confirmation of your attendance that you can use. And for everyone attending, you will be getting an email from us on Monday with those resources. For anyone who starts off attending and life happens, we totally get that. And as a result, you will be able to, this will be available through both of us, through our websites, and we'll also be promoting it. And you can listen at whatever point, and you will certainly get the resources because you've registered. If you share it with anyone else, please let them know that they will be able to get the resources by emailing, and we have that information as well. We would love, love, love your questions. This is a conversation. This is not a lecture, but in order to be able to have the conversation in the best way, we thought it would be great to do it as a webinar and then open up the Q&A with the question box. So please share your questions in the control panel, and Matt will be reading us those at the end, and Kate and I will do our best to answer or get back to you if we do not have the answer. We will also be doing 5 giveaways concluding on October 24th. So we are really grateful to all of our sponsors who are going to be sending better protein options and as part of their sponsorship, and we'll be sending those out to you, as well as one winner will receive my gold Better Nutrition membership. If you would like to enter for those giveaways, please just head over to my website and you will be able to send us an email through the Connect Better section. And what we are asking you to do in order to be entered is to tell us one thing at #DoOneThingBetter based on what you learned in this summit. Could be one thing that you personally are going to do better, or it could be something that you are going to advise your patients to do better. And when I am saying better, I am relating it to protein. However, if you just want to share something that you're going to do better or motivated to, I think that satisfies the requirements as well. And we use a random selection application, and the winners are notified via email. As I mentioned, all attendees who are registered will receive our resources packet. It includes recipes, it includes the Better Protein Nutrition Guide. I'll be sharing that with you later, as well as marketing, contact, and social media information from our sponsors. please, I cannot underscore enough, whether you are a dietitian, a dietetic student, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, we've had health coaches sign up. We have some of my my fitness trainers have signed up. And so if you are joining us from whatever walk of life, if you're a health enthusiast and just interested in this information, our sponsors really do want to connect with you. So please use these contacts, appropriately, obviously, but please use them once you receive them. And if you are not watching this live, then please send us an email in order to get the resources packet. Okay. I live in Washington, D.C., and sometimes we have sirens outside, so you will be hearing those throughout the broadcast. Nothing is going on here, it's outside. Just want to let anyone know on that part. So what will you learn? We had sent this out, and we just want to be very clear on what our objectives are and what we intend to deliver through this webinar. Participants will be receiving and will be able to assess better protein needs for different populations. We will also be defining, and you will be able to define sustainability in real-time terms, using things such as definitions across US-based Health Association, the FAO, food manufacturers, and the USDA. You will additionally be able to make better protein recommendations to meet better protein needs. If you're an individual listening, you'll be able to make those recommendations for yourself, so making better protein choices, as well as to upgrade the protein nutritional quality of meals and snacks. And we want to be clear that when we're talking about better, it better be doable. So we'll be addressing budgets, cultural, dietary needs, and preferences, as well as being able to effectively translate, again, if this applies to you, effectively translate current dietary guidelines into sustainable, delicious protein choices for the public, or for your family members, or for your clients, as well as discover resources and recipes to continue to help you recommend better protein choices. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kate, because we want to talk about why this conversation and why now. And this is sort of the behind the scenes into several conversations that happened over the course of 6 months between she and I over text and in person, and maybe even a cocktail, where we ended up coming up with why it is that we need to have this conversation. So Kate, I will turn it over to you, and just let me know when you need me to advance a slide.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. This really grew out of a shared vision that Ashley and I were seeing in the space, as protein and sustainability and the good food movement all are kind of converging, with a lot more people talking about it and a lot more people asking questions. And I think that's a great thing. I wrote my book, Go Green, Get Lean, in 2009, and was talking about a lot of these issues back then. And it was still seen, I think it was a little ahead of its time. It was still seen as sort of a nice to have, not a need to have. And boy, have things changed. And now it's really incredible to see consumers driving this, food manufacturers and entrepreneurs driving this with new visions into the marketplace. Retailers are stepping up, and health professionals, which really brings us to this, why this conversation. We've all heard the stats, right? That food production, when we look at sustainability, what we eat is right up there with what we drive. I like to say the typical American diet is the SUV of eating styles. We know that globally, food production is responsible for 80% of deforestation and uses 70% of the world's fresh water, and up to 30% of total greenhouse gas emissions comes from the foods we eat. And that's why I feel so like that it's so important that health professionals sit at the table, because we are the ones providing some dietary guidance to people and helping translate this. So I'm so excited, whoever is on the call and listening, whether you are working with patients or whether you're just an eater interested in the latest information, this is really for you, because a couple things are converging on protein as the nutrient category with the biggest environmental impact. That's really why we're focusing on protein in this webinar. And if we look at global demand and predictions, it's expected to double global protein demand by 2050. So having a clear vision of what the science says and how we can drive improvements in our health and our choices at the grocery store and the food system and our planet is really at the heart of what we're hoping to help you walk away with today. So our protein obsession, we know protein's at that red hot center of trends from a weight loss and culinary and sustainability. And then even if you're looking across food tribes, the science continues to evolve. It's a new space. And so the evidence as protein really being this hot spot in our diets with the greatest potential, if we get it right, to have those outcomes that we want. And also, we're going to help you see just how policy, both in the US and globally, is starting to shift. We're seeing these better shifts to policies that really align with this and these global frameworks. And then we're going to do some really fun case studies at the end to show you and help you bring this to life in today's food landscape. These rapidly changing market forces, from food service commitments to food entrepreneurs that truly are reshaping everything from our, morning cup of coffee to the plate to the glass to what we toss on the grill for dinner at night. So can you advance the slide? And when we talk about better protein, as Ashley touched upon, just to be clear, what we're talking about is getting the right amount of this nutrient. I'll show in the next couple slides, we're going to talk about current amounts we see in the US that people are eating and where those foods are coming from versus what's recommended in the dietary guidelines. And then enjoying that mix of the better protein food sources more often. And really this comes down to that right mix of plants versus animals, choosing sustainable seafood, and most of all, making sure it is craveable and compelling for people so that they want to do it and it's easy to do it. Of course, it also has to be accessible and affordable for all eaters, or it just won't happen and we won't have those profound shifts. It really has to be across the food system. Next slide. So let's just start with the current recommended protein food intake. And that's how the USDA refers to it, obviously because these are protein foods, in quotes, that the USDA sort of categorizes on that protein portion of our plate. Of course, your patients or the public are getting protein from other sources as well. If they choose to include dairy, for instance, other nuts and seeds and other vegetables, whole grains, of course, having grams of protein. So, and things like quinoa and whatnot. So we're just looking at the recommended protein food intake. So as a refresher, this is what the 2015 dietary guidelines say. And you can really see how it breaks out that ideally for a 2,000 calorie a day diet, how much should we be eating from these different sources? 8 ounces of seafood a week. If we lump meat, poultry, and eggs together, that comes in at 26 ounces. And then nuts, seeds, or soy, 5 ounces. So just so you can see that breakout of what our current policy is recommending, of course, if you are following a Mediterranean diet, a DASH style diet, or the vegetarian diet that are all sort of suggested as acceptable alternatives to the food pyramid, those numbers are going to change because you'll be taking out the meat category and bumping up the other categories. Next slide. So if that's what's recommended, how are we doing for actual intake? And this also comes from the dietary guidelines. We really see that there are some trends, some consistent trends, that when it comes to meat, poultry, and eggs, most people are getting at the high end of what's recommended or even above what's recommended, except for females after age 30, after age 51. So no one's eating too little, and we even have some categories on the male side, age 14 to 70, with higher than what they need in that group. Seafood, if we go down to the middle, as you can see, across the board, we're falling short, again, just compared to USDA guidelines, where we aren't getting enough of this food group. And of course, we know that because of the long chain omega-3 fatty acids and the DHA and the EPA, as well as other nutrients in this group, this is something we really want to look at, of not getting enough of these nutrients in our diet. And sources that are naturally rich in these nutrients. And then nuts and seeds, again, a little bit lower than average, especially for certain groups. Seems like the males who are eating higher than meat, poultry, and eggs are lower on nuts, seeds, and soy. And then females as well on the low end until age 30 to 50, that sort of, you know, older female. Next slide. And this just shows you, this just came out actually to really put it in perspective, how much of actual versus recommended intake of protein foods are we getting. So on average, if the dietary guidelines are recommending 5.5 ounces a day just from this food group, in 2014, according to this new study that came out, the average American is getting 7.1 ounces of protein foods in this group. And actually it's an incomplete picture because they didn't look at seeds and soy. So you can see that the line, 100%, we're getting, you know, 3 ounces a day of red meat, 3 ounces a day of chicken, and less than 2.7 ounces a week per person of fish. So really, again, these trends are very consistent in the data, but it's always helpful to really know, where do we need to zero in on our messaging? Where exactly are the things that we could make some swaps to better align with dietary intake? Next slide. And so this, again, breaks it out a little bit further from the same study, just so you can see. Those dried beans and lentils were also well below where they need to be. Tree nuts below where they need to be, seafood below where it ideally would be, peanuts at 3.9 ounces. So just really, again, reiterating that point that higher in the animal protein categories and lower in the plant protein. Next slide. Okay, so why are we focusing on protein for sustainability? A broader sustainability conversation around diet is beyond the scope of this webinar, but I just wanted to share with you the big picture and why protein is sort of that hot spot of diets. And it really has to do with resource use going into the different types of protein sources. This comes from the Environmental Working Group's Meat Eater's Guide to Climate Change. And you can just see on the left, it's a good example looking at life cycle analysis, which really just looks at what kind of greenhouse gases are produced during production of these foods, both on the farm and after the farm, processing, cooking, retail, waste disposal. And the trend I just want you to see on this is that the largest footprint from a carbon footprint and a global warming standpoint tends to be the red meat animal products. You'll also see farmed salmon there next to the pork. And the reason, I get a lot of questions from people around, well, why is that up there? And that is because it is flown fresh. And air freight is one of the big carbon footprint expanders, if you will. So if it were frozen, that would not be as big, because frozen is considerably greener both in transport and in limiting that food waste. So that's where farmed salmon comes in there. But you can see the trend that our animal products are almost to the left, and then we've got eggs, potatoes, rice, peanut butter, nuts, and as you move to the right, you are getting more into the plant products, the tofu, the lentils, the dried beans, etc. And then the other piece of that is on the right side, also from EWG, you can just see it's the emissions. That's the methane emissions from cows, which is 23 times more warming than carbon dioxide. And then most importantly, just growing the feed for the animals to then convert it into animal calories. And you lose a lot in that conversion. And that's another place where when we look at something that's done in the wild, say you're hunting venison for dinner, you're not going to have that big input of feed because that happens out in the wild. So next slide. So how do health experts define a sustainable diet? I just want to make sure that you have the different sense of these definitions that are working around. In the biggest way, and this is a great snapshot from the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, there's a couple dimensions that we want to be looking at. Really, the sustainable, resilient, healthy food systems and water systems have this component of environmental stewardship, nutrition and health, social and cultural and ethical capital, and economic vitality. So that's really the gold standard where we can promote health today while protecting resources and communities' well-being for tomorrow. And then on the right here is the FAO definition. It's sort of long, but really you'll just see a low environmental impact, which have a strong contribution to food and nutrition security and a healthy life for present and future generations. That's really at the crux of sustainability, preserving resources and renewing and regenerating so that future generations also have that same ability for health. Next slide, please. Now the USDA definition is slightly different. So this really looks at how do we satisfy human needs, how do we enhance environmental quality and the resource base on which the agriculture depends and make most efficient use. But how do we also sustain the economic viability of farm operations and enhance the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole? So a little bit of a different focus there, but just helpful to see if you're talking about USDA guidelines, understanding what kind of definition they're working from on sustainability, of course, is super helpful. Next. And then Americans, you'll see, actually define sustainable diets very differently. And it does seem to break along income levels. This comes from the 2015 International Food and Information Council Food and Health Survey. And I love this survey because it really is a broad swath of average American eaters. Average people of a mix of incomes and backgrounds and parts of the country. So you'll see here that for the average American, a sustainable diet, actually, they're interpreting it as being a balanced, nutritious meal, affordable and readily available. And then only 23% said it was having a smaller impact on the environment or talking about being socially responsible. And when they dove into that 23% number, researchers found it really was those with a higher income. So I think this is super important to keep in mind when we're communicating with the public or when you are working with clients. Just make sure you're all on the same page when you're tossing around these terms, sustainability and socially responsible. Next slide. The 2015 Dietary Guideline Advisory Report, this was the first time we really saw sustainability language step into our dietary guidelines. And this wasn't ultimately accepted. This chapter 5 was pushed out before the final guidelines were issued and into the 2015 dietary guidelines. But you can see here, and we've included this resource in the resources you'll all receive at the end of the webinar. You can see the broad vision of what a more sustainable shift looks like. Higher in plant foods such as vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and lower in animal-based foods. This is that shift we need to be more health promoting and is associated with lesser environmental impact. And really that this can be achieved through a variety of dietary patterns. We don't have to be cutting out food groups by any means. As you saw in those earlier slides, there's a huge amount of improvement we could get just even moving towards if everyone met the actual guidelines rather than what they're currently eating. Next slide. And so this guidance, while it was pushed out of the United States 2015 dietary guidelines, it really is being incorporated globally at an increasing rate. These have all just happened in the past couple of years. This was from the EU, the Live Well for Life final recommendations. And you'll see the guidance they gave to the EU: eating more plants, eating a variety of foods, color and variety. Food waste is tackled here, moderating our meat consumption, both red and white. And I love how they frame it: enjoy other sources of protein such as peas, beans, and nuts. And then buying food that meets a credible certified standard. That's super important. And as you can see, they lead with MSC, which is Marine Stewardship Certified, Marine Stewardship Council. We've also included on the right there 2 other certifications that you can find. The ASC certification, Aquaculture Stewardship Council, which is really this great certification for environmental and socially responsible seafood, as well as BPA, Best Aquaculture Practices. So MSC, ASC, BPA, or other certified credible standards help really give that transparency that you are buying what you think you're buying. And then lastly, again, really broad info, eating foods high in fat, fewer foods high in fat, salt, and sugar. Next slide. So if that's across Europe, it's also, we're seeing it within countries in Europe. And these are all links you can dig into, but they all are essentially including the same types of talking points of this shift: sustainability, health, shift, overlap. Welcoming more plants, enjoying a greater variety. So the British Dietetic Association, the Netherlands, Brazil, I remember when that came out in 2014 and everyone was talking about it because it really is a paradigm for us to look at moving forward. And Norway and Germany all bringing these ideas into their policy for health professionals to use for the public and the media. So these are all great resources to look at. Next slide. And then lastly, I would just say it's really trickling up to the greater global health community. In 2014, the Rockefeller Foundation and the Lancet coined the term planetary health as a new discipline for health professionals, really trying to lay this groundwork that, hey, if we're talking to people about the best choices for health, we really need to look at the planet's resources that human health is dependent on. And actually, just in April, this image on the right here is now a monthly publication that the Lancet is putting out on planetary health. There's a lot in here on diet, there's a lot in here on air pollution, there's a lot in here on chemicals in the environment. So absolutely a great resource if you want to stay up to date in the science and see how these dots are getting connected. And I think for our profession, just super, super powerful to watch as we move forward. Oh, and then lastly, just how these can really be, even with existing tools that we have, ways to have fresh entry points in that conversation. I know the Mediterranean diet pyramid gets so much attention and love, and here's a fresh way, a new take on an ancient proven healthy eating pattern. And life cycle analysis out of Europe has actually shown that there's an inverted pyramid the other way if you looked at sustainability and carbon footprint, so that the Mediterranean diet is a hugely popular way not only to be healthy but also significantly more sustainable. And we know the USDA guidelines mentioned that, the Mediterranean pyramid, as a great model. And then on the right, the healthy eating plate, if you use that, you can even see their protein category gives a little bit more guidance on what kinds of proteins constitute healthy protein. So those are two great resources that can really be entry points into this conversation for patients or the public. Next slide. And we're seeing it reshaping menus and media for sure. This on the left is the menus of change. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend you check it out online. Every year they do a new report on the state of sustainability and bringing it, how do we drive these changes to improvements in our health in the food system by changing up what's on our plate. And so these are some great examples of specific things that you can do, and great tips, whether you're, again, with the media or with the public or in your own diet to have better protein. You'll see here everything from increasing variety of protein. We know that salmon, tuna, and shrimp are the top 3. We need to see more kinds of seafood and variety, moving legumes and nuts to the center of the plate more often, and all of these great messages. And then on the right there, you'll see menus. The National Geographic tackled food waste. It's really exciting to see just the media cover these issues, but I think it's also, if you are a health practitioner and you work with the media, helping them get that message right so that it feels doable. As Ashley loves to say, better be delicious and better be doable and better be easy. And that's where we can help really facilitate those messages to the media. Next slide. And I think lastly, this is just showing, we've talked a lot about science and policy, but I thought this was really interesting data just showing how trends on the menu level of what people want and what retailers are, how food service is responding. I think if you click once more, Ashley, there's a seed slide. Yeah, there you go. So you can see the growth in some of this, which I think is super exciting for innovation and health conversations of how this is reshaping at the food service level and at the fast casual level for where your patients and people are going to eat. Next slide.
So yeah, it's fascinating, and thank you, Kate, for sharing the context in which there is an opportunity for us to do better in every conversation, but defining what that better is really actually very difficult because of whether you're talking about most recently the media messages or how marketing is on package or how it's on menus. Really, we've created, from a population standpoint, we haven't given, and I say we really as healthcare practitioners, we haven't given a lot of tools on how to help the individual assess their better protein intake. And that is something that we have to do a better job. I think most of us, depending on what degree of schooling you have learned things like, a deck of cards and, this thickness, but suddenly a deck of cards isn't making, isn't passing muster if we're talking about hemp seeds or if we're, having a conversation about a plant protein beverage or soup and that kind of a thing. And so how do we even talk to people about what is the right quantity? And certainly we know that there are distinctions in those needs. And so one of the key things that I think is really critical to focus on, and I'll be sharing some resources, so I'm not just going to tell you how these are all problems and not share those resources, but is to not just, as convenient as we want something to be, we can make it oversimplified. And if we give someone a number, whether it's the 0.8 kilograms or, we'll use 0.36 and multiply that times your body weight in pounds, if we give them that number, we're not taking into account some of the most important factors that can actually be influencing what their better protein needs actually are. And those are factors such as your age is definitely a factor, and I would put age and life stage together because we know I had a 48-year-old client the other day who is in her 3rd trimester with twins. So she is in a very different life stage than many other 48-year-olds. So if I'm just looking at her age, I'm not going to be looking at her protein needs properly. Activity levels, and this is really important across the spectrum. This could be somebody who, is just tends to be more sedentary in lifestyle, but it could also be somebody who is extremely active, who is sidelined with an injury. And how does that shift your protein and your better protein needs? And that is, I mentioned that as well under current health status. If you're somebody who is trying to address a digestive issue, or on the other side, if you have had surgery or are dealing with a treatment protocol right now, your better protein intake and your better protein needs likely needs to be adjusted around really also what your total food intake can be. I've spent quite a lot of time in the past working with bariatric patients, and the messaging there where it was high protein diet, I had to really shift that message and say, So it's not that it's a high protein diet, it's that when we take a stomach the size of a football and we shrink it down to the size of an egg, we really have to look in that space and say, now what does your body need 3 months, in the first 3 months post-surgery to do the best? And we have to make some choices there. And that isn't a dietary prescription for your lifetime, but that's a dietary prescription at that time. And so even in that instance, protein intake might be more important than certain vegetable intake, etc. Other things that we have to think about in the assessment of your better protein intake is not just the quantity, but the frequency. I like to use the analogy that our bodies are designed not like a streetcar where we get to go in and fill up the gas tank or put the air in the tires just once, but we're designed more like a race car. And so our body actually does better when we give it the better amount more often. And that's going to be better for digestion. And we know, especially with age or with pre-existing health issues, and really from a general health and energy standpoint, that digestion will happen better if we're not overwhelming the digestive system with too much, and certainly if the digestive system is lacking in certain nutrients or has less of its what it needs to run better at that time, whether it's acid or digestive enzymes, etc. And so the other part of it from that standpoint is when you're thinking about that frequency is, there's the usage component, right? Which is we want the body to be able to use what it's getting in that moment as opposed to storing it, because we have really great storage capabilities, i.e. our fat cells, but we're not great. It's like our storage centers located across the country when it comes time to actually use those. It's very difficult to get the body to actually use that fat once it's been made and to break it down into energy. And so we want to not contribute and increase that storage. So that's going to be important. And then what kinds of protein are you consuming? So one of the things that I think is still with all of the slides that Kate was showing, we'll get into this a little bit more, is challenging is that, we have these categories. We have a meat category or a beef category or a seafood category, and we're not doing having a lot of conversation at the assessment or the advising level on the quality, because as we will point out, especially in our case studies, there are extreme differences within there. So, if you're talking about farm seafood, vast differences depending on, even if you look at original farming to where it is now and to where it has the potential to go, as well as different species and different parts of the world. So we really have to pay attention to that quality piece. So the source is going to be so significant. And then the term processing, which I think as an ex-advertising or marketing executive, processing is one of those words, processed foods, that is so challenging for the individual, and especially in the protein assessment, because, are we talking about, when we talk about a protein powder, or when we talk about, somebody's grabbing a grab-and-go already made beverage, or, what if you're grabbing seeds or nuts, but what if you want to use a flour to make a protein, more protein-rich pancake? What's the degree of processing? So I like to use the term kitchen processed, and that's one that I'll use as a guidance term, but I think that is something in the quality space that we also have to take into account. And then there are things that as we're doing that assessment, that actually will tell us, the practitioner, a heck of a lot about your lifestyle and your preferences. And we need to pay attention to that very, very clearly, because we are getting clues about what will be delicious and what will be doable. So if all of your protein choices, as we're assessing your current nutrition, if all your protein choices are grab and goes, and I present you now with a great option for making a wonderful wild salmon dish at home, and it's going to be something that has 37 steps, and you've actually never even purchased salmon in the grocery store, then that's not going to be very doable. I might be able to get you there with a lot of support, but there are intermediary steps that we could be taking in that space, and perhaps you're never going to do that, and we just, we have to build the better plan as the one that fits your particular lifestyle. And we also need to understand, are you following a kosher diet? Are you, are there religious preferences? Are there choices that you are making? It's not my call to decide whether or not those are the right choices unless they're in conflict with you meeting your health goals. And if you're making those choices, then what I have to understand is what's behind those preferences. So as I make recommendations from this assessment, I'm going to be able to help you make better choices that fit within your lifestyle and preferences. So how do we do that? I'm going to share some of the tools that I have by way of example. These are just visual ones. If there's a better way, please share with me. I'm always love learning. After about 20 years working with patients, I feel like I've come a long way, but I still think that there's a lot more that we can do better. So the better way to help somebody figure out their protein needs and to see how they're actually doing. So one of my fun taglines or quips these days is stop guessing what your body needs and start assessing. And all of us as practitioners, we know from day one, we never go out there and just say, hey, here's what you need. We have to know who you are. And so within my Better Nutrition Plan, which is available on my website, I don't just have the typical day. I have that here for space reasons, but I also have the not so typical day because it's really important to contrast those two, as well as a play day. And I like to say, if you don't know what the play day is, then we have to have a whole other conversation, on that part. But within here, you'll see that I'm assessing those 4 pillars that I was talking about in the assessment earlier, and I'm using those as what we're going to try to do the work to assess. So with frequency, I'm setting up that there are going to be different pit stops throughout the day, and there may be more than 5. I just put 5 on here because I like to, I say to my patients, I know that life doesn't happen in 3-hour increments, but if you are getting roughly the right nutrient balance of those carbohydrate, proteins, fats, non-starchy vegetables, then you should ideally be ready for another pit stop in the neighborhood of around 3 hours. And so that's, I think 3 times the 5 gets us into roughly the average person's day. But I also ask questions at the bottom. Overall, how are you doing? How is your sleep? How's your body? How's your exercise? And I'm not asking you to rank them on a scale of 1 to 10. I want to actually know how you felt about them. And so I ask it that way. Very, very significant change as it has to do with protein in particular. We also today need that service station space. We need to know if you're popping or throwing back. Are you, having, are you taking medications? That's going to be really important for our overall assessment. But are you using protein powders? Or, I just saw someone's launching protein lollipops. And, some people, I'm sure that just means that there are, more things to come in this protein space. And so it's really critical that we're assessing somebody's total protein intake. And then it's also our job, as the previous slides were pointing out, and our need in a better assessment, to remind people that there are what I like to call these blended groups, which are, in nature, yes, there are some foods that are just protein, but there are many foods that are proteins that have other nutrients in there. But then I also strategically do something here. You're not seeing all of the photos, but notice that I don't have my non-starchy vegetables up here, which is another page in the nutrition plan. So yes, broccoli provides amino acids, or, as do many of our different plants. And I think it's an important conversation that we'll talk a little bit about further, about teaching people and being clear about the difference between a complete protein and amino acids in that part. But when we're looking at helping people make choices, is to help them sort of understand, as Kate was talking earlier about using terms that we're all on the same page. This is a helpful way to make sure that we're communicating on protein, and even pointing out things like, from nuts, seeds, legumes, etc., that we have different nutrients, different foods that may be higher in certain amounts of protein, or are a complete source of protein. And so what does that mean for you? Not judging them as necessarily better, and certainly not as a perfect choice, but just helping us with that combination. So another tool that I have, so my Better Nutrition membership is full of these tools, and one of the ones that's available to you, you'll see over in the, it's the left hand of my screen, I think it's the left hand of your screens as well. There are several actually standard equations, but if we only use that standard equation, we're not going to get this full assessment that's actually going to help us deliver on better protein needs more often. And so what I do is I build on those, taking the weight in pounds and then multiplying it times the amount to get your grams in the day. And some of the recommendations may not actually even be about changing your food, your actual food choice, but about splitting it up to that earlier point of frequency and having that more often. And so I'll be asking questions in here about, not just where are you getting your protein from, but, how much are you having at one pit stop, so that we can start to understand maybe my issue is actually a quantity of protein at one time. And it's very, very common. Over the years, I've seen patients pretty consistently do a less good job at one meal or more than one, and at many of their snacks, I use the term pit stop, where they're not getting in the proteins choices. They have some meals that are like full out protein and some meals that are, much more, the nutrient balance is skewed more towards carbohydrate or carbohydrate and fat. So this evaluation is something to use that also asks questions about your lifestyle and, to make sure that we're understanding how we can do that better assessment. So those are some of the tools. This tool, for all of you, you will be getting as a resource guide. One of the questions that I get all the time is about the, the complete protein and the notion that that in order to eat plants, I have to either have the beans and rice at the same time, which we know to be more old school thinking, or that I have to choose certain plants that are a complete protein. And we don't really have a great conversation about the fact that, as dietitians will say, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, but what does that actually mean? How does the body actually build a protein? And once you've built it, what is the action that it's taking? So it's really important to remind people that it's not just about your muscles. One of the reasons that this planetary and personal health piece is so critical is proteins play a critical role in all of the communications in your body from an enzyme, a hormone standpoint. So as we're looking at the types that we're getting in and where we're getting in those amino acids, just in the same way that I'll talk to individuals about eating a rainbow, I want to make sure that you're not falling in love with just one plant protein, that you're getting in a variety so that you're getting in these different amounts of the amino acids as well. And another key point on here is that notion, we were talking about it earlier. Yes, you can, and in fact, many of us are getting more protein, taking in more protein than our body needs. So there is a point of too much, and there's certainly a point of too much at one time. And so what is that balance? How can we create a better balance? And I've got some of those tools in there as well. And then focusing on all protein sources are not created equal, especially within a category. That goes to those conversations about processing that I was talking about before, as well as different origins really within that space. So this again is part of the resources that you'll be receiving. So I wanted to take a moment and go through, I was going to call this myths, and then I like to use the word myth takes actually, because they're like mistakes and myths kind of merged in together. But I think that these are ones that we need to attack twofold. On an individual level, we need to attack them with our doing the better assessments from the starting point so that people are not guessing about what they need. We also need to make sure we're communicating about what protein actually does. And I think when you understand that communication piece, you want to make sure that you're having really good communication going on in your cells and hormones and these sorts of things, that you get better outcomes. But also I think we need to attack it at the media level and at the social media level. And this is the responsibility of anyone who's posting things with the intent for their post to motivate anyone into making different choices. And remembering that, of course, it's not about perfect, but it's about making better, not perfect choices more often. So one of the common protein myth takes is eating more protein to get more protein. So more is not better. We want to make sure that the quality, as we were talking about, is key. And that you also want to make sure that when somebody is making a protein emphasis in their diet, you want to make sure that the reason that it's so critical, if we're, I'll go back to my bariatric example, or perhaps I'm working with a patient who's following more of a higher protein, low carb, that's their choice, and I'm working with them on that. I want to underscore that if you are emphasizing protein, then you have to emphasize quality of that protein, because what else you will get, for example, with plant proteins, you're getting fiber, and you can be getting the plant nutrients, all those great phytonutrients. And with animal proteins, if we're talking about seafood, we can be getting in, vitamin D, we can be getting in those essential fatty acids, we can be getting in different antioxidants. So I think it's important for us to understand what you are getting, but also what you could be missing, right? So if you're emphasizing the protein, what happens if you're missing out on more fiber? What happens if or sufficient fiber, if you're missing out on the phytonutrients and other things? That could be putting you at a deficit. So we really have to look at that balance and where those things will come from. And, I look at it as total nutrition. And so if I'm advising someone, sometimes that means that those other nutrients may be coming from a supplemental standpoint, especially if they're proving challenging to get in for any reason in the food form or in combination with the food form. And then certainly choosing a product because it touts more protein. So my line of the day these days is that the front of a package is more like an online dating profile or a Facebook page. We're telling the story on the front intentionally that it's our best opportunity to create a relationship with the person who will be purchasing it. Again, ex-advertising executive, that is the use, and that is very, very valuable real estate. And it's not inappropriate to tout if you offer more protein. However, it may be a strategic tool to direct your attention away from the other ingredients or to direct the consumer's attention away from the other ingredients that are there. Or you could have something that actually is doing a beautiful job with all of its ingredients, and it is delivering you higher protein, but it just does not taste delicious to you. So I think we have all had those experiences. I certainly have tasted a lot of products, and there are things that, yes, they will totally deliver on protein or even more protein, but it is not going to pass my palate test. And so I think that's going to be really important, because if your better protein choice is not delicious, we are going to keep eating to find something else that is delicious. And that is going to mean that despite having a very good or a better protein intake, our overall dietary outcomes, our overall health outcomes are not going to be the ones that we are seeking. Making a choice because it's a complete protein. I was talking about this before. What we need is to build better protein. So we need that balance of the different amino acids, which are in, plants have them in different balance, and even the same plant sourced in different locations or the same plant processed differently is going to have different amino acid balances, as well as the quantity of those to be paying attention. And then choosing animal products because they're complete protein. Remember, animals often eat plants. In fact, most of us, we are animals, and we often are eating plants in order to make that complete protein in our body. So it can seem like a shortcut. It can seem like a better option. It can be a better choice, but it is not the choice that we need to feel that we have to make based on that part. And then here is a little bit of where the humorous and the, especially on after coming off of one of the Natural Products Expo and some of the 2.0 or food tech conversations that are going on, just because something is being touted as a better protein, and especially better plant protein, doesn't mean that it is, or even that it has any significant amount of protein. I had to educate a recent summit that I was keynoting because they said, move over, this is jackfruit is the new meat replacement. I said, well, so that's interesting because I was making a joke, and I don't mean this, but I was like, well, then that's going to have a lot of diabetes happening, because I was like, we had the conversation about starches and carbohydrates, and I am certain that there are amino acids in jackfruit, but it is not, if you read a nutrition label, you're not getting a significant source of protein there. So we can make a mean sloppy joe. I love that. But instead of putting it on a bun, maybe we're going to toss the hemp seeds on top of it, or we're going to toss it into, in with some seafood and enjoy it that way, or, use a bone broth. I mean, there are many different ways to incorporate that in. In the Vegan Tech 2.0, I borrowed this term from Kate. I appreciate it, sort of the plant burger revolution, and this idea of, are there cleaner meats? Maybe, but also we have to be really careful about the science behind them. And we also really have to look at the ingredient label, going back to that notion of processing. How processed are they on that part? So lots to think about in that part. And so really going back to what Kate had brought up with this, thinking about what we should be encouraging. We want to be thinking about the fact that we have a growing population, yes, but we have to feed it better nutrition, better protein choices, so that we can enable better health. Eating less is actually the better way. So I love that that was pointed out here, not just talking about that we're trying to get in all these other foods, but we also are trying to actually reduce total calories in most instances, or certainly make better calorie choices. So when we eat less, it means there are more better protein available options for others. And also, of course, eating less means fewer calories. And also it means it's easier from a digestive standpoint. Delicious food is satisfying. So when we're eating better, we can actually enjoy eating less, which is going to accomplish the goals above. Plants do deliver better nutrition. They're delivering us critical phytonutrients that we know that we need. We want those whole plants more often because in the whole form, they're delivering fiber, plant nutrients, fats, micronutrients. And we also know that plants, to Kate's points and some of the slides before, that they save water as well as other resources. And then we also want to remember that we're going to be talking in here and using a term regenerative agriculture. We want to remember that sustainable seafood is regenerative too. So first of all, sustainable, it is regenerative within the world, within the waters, and within doing better for those species. I love every day seeing announcements of, where fisheries are, where fish are returning, and, we're seeing changes happening there, which is incredible. But also it alleviates some of the pressure of animal consumptions, especially with our bigger feedlots and some of those. So it becomes a better choice, not just from a nutritional standpoint, but also from a regenerative standpoint. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that piece. And that certified aquaculture, that certification needs to be part of the solution, not just because of the end product, but because the certification is around resource efficiency and also transparency. So that's really important for all of us as consumers and educators, but also that transparency is helping with shared knowledge amongst those that are producing sustainable seafood. And we're seeing exponential improvements that are going to translate into better food, better be delicious, as well as better resource for all of us moving forward. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kate to talk about what do we know what we should be getting in, so what do we want and how are we going to get there?
Oh my gosh, I don't know about our listeners, but I'm still thinking of the protein lollipop you brought up. I don't know where you saw it, but gosh, I got to try that and to learn more about it, because it kind of sounds intriguing and gross at the same time. So have to look into that. So here is some data from IFIC, International Food and Information Council. I think it's always helpful to step back and say, okay, we've just outlined the case, we've outlined the science. I love that Ashley really walked you through her process on how we do it. How do you do it at the patient level? This is just that broad checking in. What do consumers want? We see it's very consistent. They want weight loss. They want heart health. Making sure that we're approaching it with those benefits in mind. If you work a lot with media or with patients, when you get their eyes to light up because you've hit on something that is that holy grail, and weight loss, weight management is a huge part of that. Next slide. And we see also it still has to be tasty, has to be affordable, has to be healthy. In the 2017, they just started in 2015 asking about sustainability, which is that low red bar. It's higher than it was in 2015, but it's still not the driving reason a lot of people are going to make a purchase. Or if they talk about sustainability, it still has to check those other boxes. It has to be convenient, delicious, and work for their lifestyle. So I just think it's a good reminder when you're approaching somebody to kind of say, what is your top priority? And then back into the conversation, respecting where they are at with these. And like this, we just said, we know convenience is king. Up to almost 80% of consumers really package food. They're choosing packaged food because they want to make their life easier. And the packaged food aisle, packaged food and processed food are not the same thing. That's what I always like to say, because the convenience and the portability and the technology and the innovation that is happening with that convenience. So just worth keeping in mind. We know that convenience is king. And then this is just, I think, interesting to always look at what are the top what are the top diets people are following and why. You'll see food tribes, paleo, vegan, vegetarian. These can be sort of vague or really specific ideas that people have following. And I say vague, obviously paleo has specific restrictions, but now I'm seeing, you know, variations of paleo, vegan paleo, you know, paleo eating legumes. So these kind of food tribes have popped up, and we see that 1 in 7 are following specific eating plans. Next slide.
Okay, great. So I'm going to do a quick time check because I want to be very responsible and make sure that we collectively do want to make sure that we finish on time. However, we also want to make sure that we are getting your questions answered. So please share any of your questions in the chat box. And if we do not have the opportunity to answer them to you live right here, what we will be doing is Kate and I will record our answers at the end, so they will be a part of the webinar, so that they will be on there. And then also we will be sharing those with you, and Matt can tell us who specifically was asking that question if you want to. If you want it anonymously answered, you may also put that piece as well. But one of the reasons I want to do that is just have a moment to savor what better protein nutrition can look like and taste like. So better be delicious. Thank you to our sponsor Rebel, who shared this wonderful recipe. And you know, one of this great opportunity is to be able to upgrade brownies into with a delicious dark chocolate, you know, adding some more of that dark chocolate, using organic ingredients, using good quality, you know, getting all sorts of different flavor, plant-based in there, and you're getting in 16 grams of plant. Suddenly a brownie is looking like a really better option, as long as you're paying attention to the quantity on that part. So I wanted to talk a little bit about trends and innovations. You know, I think that the key thing with those trends in the protein space is that it has to be delicious, and sugar is not the solution to making everything delicious. And I think that that's a really important part, but also better recipes are a key factor. And so I think teaching your patients about, you know, somebody might look at sugars 10 grams and say, oh my gosh, this is a really big issue. And then I can turn around and say, well, actually, you know, you're able to have 6 teaspoons per the World Health Organizations of added sugar, or if you're dealing with some health issues, we might drop that down, or, you know, for children, it might be a little bit less. But what we're really looking at is that better nutrient balance. And so here, what a delicious way with a blend of fiber, sugar, and that plant protein, as well as getting in adaptogens like reishi extract and ashwagandha. So you're also going to feel chill, and your body's going to be adapting to the stress of your day. You know, so we've got a bunch of different trends going on here that deliver on some of the overall better nutrition principles that I like to talk about, of better be plant-based more often, better be better nutrient balance, better grab and go, and this notion that they can be the better nutrition recipe upgrade. So from Rebel, they have 3 different protein infused, I will call, grab and go options. And then the nice part about it also is being able to use them in recipes at home. You can look for them in the refrigerated section at most of the natural food markets, or you can do a delivery. Now that we have online delivery, I feel like it's just easy to say, or you can get delivered online. But I think a key thing that we have to pay attention to in the trend innovation space, we talked about it earlier, is really that notion of the quality of the protein. And one of the things that I really like is this idea of the protein blends. So, you know, being able to see that you've got a blend here of pea and sunflower, you know, I think that that's going to be a really nice option. And it also helps you, the practitioner, to say, okay, if this is what you drank or what you had in your brownie as the protein option, now I'm going to be able to make other protein recommendations for you throughout the day, which is a great segue into our next slide.
Yeah, that is, because when we're looking at protein, we know a couple of things in broad brushstrokes around plant-based eating. And plant-based, of course, you're hearing about it all the time. Everyone's talking about it. Hopefully we've put some more parameters around that today on what that might look like. And we know that lifestyles rich in plant-based foods support good health. They have a lower environmental impact, and often have lower calories and get to that weight loss goal that we just saw from that IFIC data. We know, though, in particular with nuts, they have just really shown in the last decade of research, because when I was starting out as a dietitian, a lot of people were avoiding peanut butter, avoiding nuts because they were, quote, fattening. Remember that? Where my mom, in fact, I like to joke, she still is buying low-fat peanut butter because she was just brainwashed into thinking, oh, this is a better choice, this is a healthier option. So we know that nut consumption, that whole nut consumption, is actually linked with reduced risk of diabetes and heart disease. So huge gains in adding nuts to our diet. But peanuts in particular, what I really wanted to stress, because, you know, having just come from Expo East, where there's always seems to be this emphasis on what's new, what's more exotic, what have we just discovered as some great nut from the middle of the Amazon, or some fresh new idea, that when we look at affordability and access, which increasingly are joining the food and nutrition conversation, how do we bring more of the best, highest quality diet options to more eaters, to those who need it most? Because we know that those are the very eaters on the back end who struggle with chronic disease and diabetes. So affordability and access to me is in particular what I love about peanuts, and not always rushing off to the newest or the sexiest sounding nut or the most exotic offering. Because truly, when we look at peanuts, of course, yes, we can hit the notes. There's 7 grams of protein in an ounce of nuts, and it's packed with 30 vitamins and minerals. But peanut butter is actually available in 94% of households already. So talk about low-hanging fruit that most people can go home right after their session with you or after seeing something in the news and start adding it. I also love the affordability. So it's not just available, but I mean, it's 2 cents per gram. So really among the most affordable plant protein options. So I think just remembering in our conversations, in fact, it's actually one of the most requested items by US food banks. And I remember when I heard that, I really smiled, because my kids often come home from school and say, we've got a food bank project, we have to bring something in, and there's nothing easier and more shelf stable, I might point out, that it doesn't need to be refrigerated. It's already there and simple as an economical source of protein that doesn't require refrigeration. But the story that I'm also loving, in addition to meeting that protein need and the protein conversation, and in addition to the trend around nuts and the science really showing those benefits that I talked about, is that peanuts have a unique ability when it comes to regenerative agriculture. And that is because they improve soil by actually helping fix nitrogen. And that's important, because if you have legumes that are replenishing the nitrogen in the soil, it reduces the need for fertilizers. And fertilizers are one of the driving carbon footprints of food and agriculture. So by farming with peanuts, you're not only creating nutrient-dense food for people, but you are regenerating the soil, and I love that. And that's actually why, if you look at what's happening now globally, I know in Haiti and in Ghana, that farmers are going back to peanut farming to regenerate the soil. So a really great way if you're trying to add more regenerative foods to your shopping list, as well as sustainable proteins. Peanuts fit the bill just incredibly. And we all know peanut butter, like I said, but I think the innovation here, to build on what Ashley was talking about, innovation is super fun. And peanut flours, I know in your recipes that you're going to be getting, there's an insanely good peanut cookie that really is peanut flour and chopped peanuts and peanut butter. So peanut flour has really changed the game on baking. Super fun to add. There's an image here of this cold pressed peanut oil. So if you are doing something where you want something raw and cold pressed, a really gourmet high-end item, this has been extremely popular, with that same nutritional profile, almost as an olive oil, but with more vitamin E. So just another wonderful option. And then something super new that is just launching is peanut milk. And I know with nut milks or other options to dairy, peanut milk having 7 grams of protein per 8-ounce cup. I'm super excited about to see that and taste that. So really, I think the peanut, the versatility and the affordability and the fact that everyone's already got it in their pantry is something that's an access point we can all start with, whether we are talking with patients or the media, or just looking for something great in our smoothie tomorrow. And these peanut butter powders are one other great trend happening in smoothies that you can use as a really high flavor and nutrient addition for that base of that smoothie. And then this one I am just so excited about. I have to say, I rarely leap up in the grocery store and just say, oh my God, I'm so excited. But this, when I saw this fish, I totally leapt with joy, and really for a couple of reasons. Personally, I think, you know, as a mom, cooking fish at home is challenging. And we opened up the webinar talking about seafood. I know I talk a lot with my colleagues about how most of us aren't eating enough seafood, especially if we're reducing our meat. It would be a better swap. But there's a lot of pain points at home. I think there's concerns about traceability and trust, which is making it really confusing as a protein for customers to feel and the public to feel like they're getting right. There's an uncertainty, you know, if I get it fresh and then my plans change, or which one is unsustainable, because I've heard that fresh flown salmon isn't sustainable. So helping our customers and the public understand sort of the benefits of and advantages and trade-offs with fresh and frozen, and where frozen really can shine when we talk about ease of convenience and being on your time and having a smaller carbon footprint. Understanding how to cook it, how to prepare it in a way that your kids aren't going to turn their noses up, or that you might not, you know, be left with leftovers and you're not sure what to do with it. And also, how do we expand when you're bored out of your gourd with salmon? And don't get me wrong, I love salmon. I love salmon, and I love that we have, you know, like Ashley said, this variety of wild stock, aquaculture, these tools at our disposal to really help improve protein quality, quantity, and resource efficiency. So this product, if you have not seen it, Love the Wild, I love them. Look at this on the right. This is the back of the box. It's in the freezer section. And freezer, like I said, cuts down fish waste, food waste, incredibly throughout the whole supply chain. Because again, at the end of the day, if something isn't going home with customers, things get tossed if it's fresh more often. And frozen, it's on your time. There's a lot less waste in the system. But if we look on the right here, look at that transparency. Where is the fish from? You're getting species, you're getting farm location, you're getting the name of who's the owner of that farm. You're learning exactly how it was fished, this open ocean net pen. And then on the seafood watch, it already does the work for you, showing you that it's a green light, best practice choice. And I even love this consumer tip about ever wonder why we leave the skin on some of our fish. And I have to say, this product actually taught me that. And I hadn't even thought about that. But keeping your skin on some of that fish helps be confident in the sourcing. With so much fish fraud and so much of uncertainty, you know, and we know there's a lot of duplicity in the fish system and the seafood chain, keeping that skin on, I just love that idea of that trust and transparency for the consumer. And so the directions are super simple. Look at that. And this company, Love the Wild, they have sea bass, they have trout, they have barramundi, one of my favorites, because barramundi is one of the few species that can actually synthesize omega-3, DHA and EPA, from plants. They don't have to always be eating smaller fish. It's a really cool sort of adaptive response they learned in the wild over millennia to synthesize omega-3 from plants. So love the fish in, fish out ratio, really, really clean. And then the ingredients you've also got here, you can see, I mean, on the left, I have a barramundi list of ingredients, and it's something I would make in my kitchen if I had the time and the confidence. And so I love this because it's simplifying fish. It's making sustainable seafood easy for customers to understand and have confidence. And it is culinary driven the way I would want to cook. So I really love this innovation because it's solving all the pain points, not only that I have as a mom or that I'm seeing my patients have or that the media ask me about with fish, but I think there's a bigger mission and a bigger social change around not only making seafood like an everyday staple, but by keeping it in your freezer, you can stock up. And when you get home and you're someone saying, what's for dinner? You can have this option. You're no longer relegated to grabbing the box of mac and cheese or that rotisserie chicken. That was all I grew up with. You know, that was like my mom's go-to. And so I'm just so grateful that the innovation is trickling down at every step of the way. It's just very well thought out. So super happy about this. And so in your resources, you will just get some of the different products that Love the Wild makes. And I am super excited about some of these changes in helping us simplify the aquaculture conversation and giving third-party certification. This is ASC certified, one of those certifications we talked about earlier that's so important.
Yeah, I would add two thoughts to that, Kate. You're not the only one that's loved it. They have had such great reception that even just in the last, it started out very thoughtfully with about, being at about 600 stores around the country. And I was just talking to them, orders are now for 2,500 as well as in national distribution. So, expanding thoughtfully, but also bringing this to more people's tables by way of the freezer. I love that part. And, I love on the packaging that it's pointing out the wild about veggies, but I also think that this goes to that early message about not just making a recommendation about more seafood, that it has to be about more sustainable seafood, that's the better choice. And so one of the things I think it allows families and individuals to do is to say no to the seafood that they may be presented with when they're out and make different choices there, but be able to make these at home and also, do it for dinner parties and, that idea. So that you're able to say that when I'm choosing the seafood, I'm making that sustainable seafood, that that better nutrition, planetary, and personal choice. So yes, I think you can tell we're both total fans on this as well as on the rest. And to that end, I'll move on into what needs to be delicious. So it was funny, we were talking a little bit about this category and trend and case study and and somewhere it popped up this idea of liquid wholeness. And so I might need to define it right now, but in the future, I'm not going to, because, we create the trends here, right? And so the idea is that, first of all, liquid nutrition has so many benefits. We are all existing today in stressed out lives. And when stress is dialed up, our digestive system is dialed back in terms of preferential treatment. And so that can be for very good reasons, or it can be, travel, or it can be things that are not going well. And it's certainly also in disease states that any of our patients or ourselves or our family members are dealing with. And so in that space, liquid nutrition has become, so exciting. People are, doing all these things with their blenders and these sorts of things, which is fantastic, because it's a great way to get in better quality nutrients more often. And so when you are looking for, to upgrade something, you can be looking, and here we've got Pacific Foods as one of our sponsors, who has done such an incredible job. I mean, I remember their first couple of products, and it was like my go-to option for soup. And I use soup for everything. It is the base of my eggs. It's the base of my veggie scrambles. It could be a base here, as we're seeing, that you can pour it from the sauce standpoint over your chicken. And so it's such a great way if the ingredients are better quality. And I think that that's a part where one of the other things that Pacific Foods has always been committed to is making sure that they're using the whole ingredient. So that idea of the whole plant ingredient, or in the case, and they were really the first ones to step up. I was very nervous about bone broth when I started to see it coming along as a trend. And I had all these people asking me about it. And I was like, well, how do you know where it's coming from? How do you know about the sourcing? How do you know? And they were the first ones that I was able to talk to about that. So one of the things I would say, and I can go back to Love the Wild on this part, as well as actually to Rebel. Rebel's offered up their advisors to me on adaptogens, so I can learn better about the science and be a better communicator about that part. And, you know, talking with Love the Wild, I learn every time we have a conversation about what's new and what I should be thinking about when I evaluate sustainable seafood and what context, you know, what really is better. And here with Pacific Foods for ages, we've been having that conversation about, you know, why do you in your soups use, you know, whole beans or whole veggies, and when you're using those whole veggies, you're able to use less sodium, or you're using the spices in there, and they're choosing to use organic ingredients more often. And, you know, in the whole space of, you know, they have this beautiful cashew milk. I mean, we've got all these different options. Well, bone broth terrified me. I just was sitting there and I was thinking, gosh, you know, I know how it's made. I know how you can make it at home, but how now we're starting to see it in packages and in powders. And so we were able to walk through the quality piece, because there are people, many of my patients, who are choosing to use bone broth where they really feel that is an incredible way for them to get digestive healing and part of, you know, some of the work that we're doing, or it's just a way that they're upgrading. The entire rest of their meal is made of plants, and that's where they're getting the protein in, but also the flavor. And so I really love that idea of being able to use this better liquid nutrition. So the idea of liquid wholeness is about whole, better quality ingredients made into the liquid form. And of course, any of us could follow a recipe and make these things at home, and the majority of us are not going to. And what a great way to, or not going to more often, I should say, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I like for myself and my patients on that part. And one of the really nice pieces is also, I kind of operate with, and this is not a sponsored statement, I've been using this statement for years, but the IKEA mentality of some assembly required. And I know that if I can get somebody to assemble ingredients, that, you know, that great taste from that red pepper and tomato soup can suddenly upgrade this chicken to something that's absolutely delicious. And then that cascade of all of those better choices, the better satisfaction, the smaller portions, the appropriate portions, you know, all of these ways to upgrade recipes to make them delicious and more nutrient dense. So really excited about that part. And you know, Pacific Foods, as I said, they just continue to delight in terms of with a variety of different options, really for everybody at following every different dietary choice. So they've been a real ally, and I shouldn't say ally, a partner for me really in this space of being able to learn about new things when it comes along, but also about how to maintain that better quality and still deliver on what Kate was talking about, what the consumer wants, which is convenience, and they want weight loss. So I can come up with great recipes like this that will help enable the weight loss, and those recipes which you will also be receiving. And so one of the final ones we call this Seeds of Change here. I'm going to talk about, and for some reason there's the logo here word, sorry about that. The logo's down at the bottom where we've got Manitoba Hemp Harvest, or Manitoba Harvest here. They have for the last 12 years been educating me on what hemp foods are. And one of the most important things that I learned is actually that hemp foods really deserve to be up there with ancient grains for us, you know, especially in this country. Fun fact, not related to protein, but from an agricultural standpoint, if you were purchasing any land, at the time of Thomas Jefferson, you actually had to purchase a tenth of it had to be hemp acreage because of the use of the hemp fibers, etc. And we've come to now realize all of the value of the hemp foods. One of the values is that it provides a complete protein. So I've often called hemp seeds or hemp hearts the wild salmon of the plant kingdom, because additionally, like wild salmon and some farm salmon, you'd have to look at how it's being farmed, the delivery of that gamma-linoleic fatty acid, which I call the glamour fatty acid, hair, skin, and nails, which partners so beautifully with the protein to give that body, you know, great messages as well as fiber. But one of the great things about hemp hearts and that hemp food is that it is is not a provider of additional carbohydrates. So sometimes when we're making plant-based choices, we actually struggle for nutrient balance. So with that idea of better swaps, I will often use, instead of maybe using a hummus, or instead of using, white bread croutons, I'll use hemp seeds on top of something and be able to deliver protein and essential fatty acids, iron, magnesium, great other nutrients on that part. One of my absolute favorites is to make hemp pesto, which upgrades my protein intake and is also just totally delicious. And this really, hemp is a great example of regenerative agriculture as well. That goes back to, I think, why, a lot of these things that we're revisiting, those heritage, the legumes like the peanuts, and here with the hemp, we know because our aging soil needs our help from a regenerative standpoint. So we can feel really good about it there. And please take the time to check out all of the different products I shared. One of my favorites is Hemp Heart Toppers, comes in savory and in sweet, and this savory is coconut and cacao, and this on top of some oats, or mixed into some overnight oats, or on top of some ice cream, whatever you're doing, is going to add absolute deliciousness as well as some great nutrient balance. So very grateful to have them on board and to share that with you. So we want to just wrap up now. We may have a moment for a question. Yep, we're leaving ourselves a second. So we have a moment on, what can we do? What do we have to do? So we have to deliver better messages. Those need to be simple messages repeated often by trusted voices. That is going to be really critical, that we need to keep those messages, following those three principles and repeat it, especially coming from us with that repetition. The better quantity I've talked about, the better variety, better be doable for you and the planet ongoing, better be delicious. It needs to be better, not perfect, more often. Make the sustainable seafood choice. Choose plants, especially when better animal options are not available. Choose those better animal options. If you're choosing animal options, those need to be better animal options. For all foods, choose whole foods, and then choose kitchen processed foods. And please do choose a variety of proteins, not just for the variety and the value that we get from having variety in our life, but also what that variety is going to do for the other nutrients that you will be getting in by way of those proteins. And then, as much as this is titled the Better Protein Summit, I had to add that we also do have to remember that better nutrition is more than just your protein choice. So much of what we're talking about today, whether it's the additional whole delicious ingredients that Love the Wild was including, or the fiber and the micronutrients that you get in the, when you're consuming your, I was just mentioning as it relates to hemp, or the fiber and the adaptogens that was in the Rebel products, or certainly from beans, we're getting in not just fiber, but we're getting in other nutrients as well as retaining water and getting in healthy fats, all of these great things, retaining water for the soil, I should say, not retaining water as humans. So I want to make sure that I'm clear on that part. But we do want to remind ourselves that when we're making the better protein choice, we're actually delivering on better nutrition, but better nutrition is about more than just that protein choice. And so we need to be clear in our communications about that piece. So we've done it. We have arrived, Matt, at the time. I think I noticed about 3 or 4 questions. I'm going to leave it to Matt to ask them quickly, and I'm going to have Kate and I jump in with them with a quick answer, and as needed, as I said, we'll use any remaining time. While we're answering questions, I'm also going to move the slides ahead so that you can see some of the resources that we offer as well.
Great, thank you. Yes, we do have some questions. We have a question from Barbara. Kate, please elaborate on how the fresh farm raised salmon has a more negative impact on the environment than frozen salmon.
Oh, that's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked it. So I think the false comparison is farmed versus wild, and not in that question, Barbara, just in the public when we are framing the issue as it being a farmed versus a wild. You really have to look at which country of origin it's coming from. You have to look, because different countries have different standards. There's when it comes to wild, around how fisheries are managed, and when it comes to farmed, around what kinds of practices they allow. So a salmon from Chile is going to have a different set of environmental regulations, policies around antibiotic use than a farm salmon from Norway. So that's why it's a more nuanced conversation than just saying wild is good, farmed is bad, because it depends with farmed where it comes from, which country, what species.
Kate, I'm going to interject for 1 second. As I understood the question also, I just want to make sure we get the second part answered. I think she was referring to that statement that you made about how when we are shipping things fresh versus when we're using a frozen product, that you early on in the conversation, you were talking about there being within, whether it's farmed or within wild, that notion of the frozen delivering a lower footprint.
Oh, yes, that's because air travel, if you look at, okay, processing up to the processing gate or the harvest, then how is it shipped to the consumer? How is it shipped to the retailer? And if it's shipped fresh, that fish has to be airlifted, okay? So, fresh fish has just a couple days shelf life, and it has to be brought from wherever it's harvested. So if it's sitting in your fish counter fresh, it's going to be airlifted, which is by and away the biggest carbon footprint way to transport something. In contrast, a frozen can be frozen right on site, and then it can be shipped in a slower way. That can be by barge, that can be by train, that can be by frozen truck, depending where that aquaculture is, where that system is happening. So when you look at carbon footprint, and then sometimes it's even a combination, like it may be done by rail to the coast and then get on a steamliner. So it just, but air fresh shipping, when you look at train, plane, or boat, or frozen rail car, or frozen truck, air freight is far and away the bigger carbon footprint. So that was the comment that I was making, just about how it gets to your fish counter or the
I like to dimensionalize the conversation. It's not specifically apropos, but I also think that just the great larger part of that is a reduction in food waste, because to your point of the shelf life of fresh fish in the home. Now, if you're taking your fresh fish and then you're freezing it, that's that piece. But I think that's an added component on the wasted food front. So just when we're thinking about that whole piece. But great question. Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Matt, do we have any others?
Yes. The question is, I currently use the Monterey Bay Aquarium app to make sustainable seafood choices. Is this an app you use, or do you prefer something else?
I use it. I love it. Yeah, I think it is great. I think one of the challenges with that, well, the good thing with the app is it's regionally based. So getting really clear about, making sure you're choosing fish from the region. It can be with the thing and I love it. So yes, there's absolutely, it is a great resource to use. One thing with where things are processed though, and this is across farmed or wild, you may be ordering it in that restaurant, but it comes down to just make sure wherever you're getting your information from, if it's at the fish counter, if it's at the restaurant, unless you're standing at the boat and buying directly from the fisherman, you almost have to have a good relationship with that retailer to trust the fish is coming from where it's saying it's coming from. And in the US, we've got country of origin labeling, but it can get a little trickier with Asia. So I would just say, with the global food supply, 90% of seafood is imported into the United States. And of that 90% number, 62% is being produced in China. So it can just be tricky as you step into international situations. You definitely want the third party certified if you can, as a standard, or just really have a great relationship with that fish counter retailer. That's why companies like Whole Foods have stepped up with programs to try to increase transparency.
Yeah. And I think I think using it is a great tool, and we need more tools like that. And I think, there are also companies that you can say, hey, you're doing this work, and I have that open relationship. I'm just showing right now one of the resources that you'll be getting so that you can start to ask some of these questions, especially as it relates more personally to your patient population, their lifestyle preferences, costs, all of those pieces. And there are companies that, that their standards, like, of making choices and things like that, will be ones that, when you're able to have that direct conversation. But I think as far as tools, yeah, it was one of the first, and I think it still is doing such a great job of at least setting a standard so that others know that they are going to be monitored and something for them to aspire to on that part. Matt, do we have any more questions?
We do. We have several, but I'm thinking maybe time for one more question, and then we can answer any other questions, maybe via a video or in the resources. So last question for the webinar, at least. I work in the school setting, so it's really hard to implement these better recommendations as we have to adhere to government regulations. What do you recommend?
Well, so first of all, I want to start off with thank you. I am so grateful to those of you that are working in this space, and for all of us in our dietetic internships, if you have gone through that for your professional experience. For me, it was LAUSD, and it was about 22 years ago. And so, watching what that experience was like at that time, and I don't know how much has changed, but I really have a lot of empathy in there. And so I think one of the things that we really need to lead with is the idea of, the better, not perfect. And the other part is making sure that everyone feels that they share responsibility, but also they share opportunity. I think in a lot of communities, parents are seeking out the ability to be engaged, whether it's in the public school or in the private school setting. I'll let Kate talk a little bit more to that. But what I also know, and it's not in the protein space, but there are companies who are changing the game, and they're doing it with either, by literally starting with one school and one project, and and making choices in that space, and then being able to work with whole food systems, whole school systems, not whole food systems on that part. So I would say that, perhaps it's some of these education tools about how to assess. Maybe it's talking to a teacher, a math teacher or science teacher about bringing the protein discussion into the classroom, maybe the sustainability one. I think there are a number of different ways, and also depending on, if you're looking at a high school level or, what age group you're working with. But Kate, any thoughts on how also from the parent side, one, especially as a parent who's a dietitian who's focused on sustainability, how you can gracefully enter into that conversation with your school professionals that maybe could make this easier too?
That's such a great question, and I agree with Ashley. Thank you. That is the most important work, is improving continuously improving, taking what we know and serving our children the very best nourishing, wholesome foods possible that fit into the budget. One thing that I would add would be on your menu cycle, from the protein swap, doing a blend of animal and legume, or animal and beans, or animal with ancient grains, to bring down costs, because often the meat or poultry is going to be the most expensive item in your purchasing. And if you can bring it down and swap out for some lentils, some beans, so in your burritos or your tacos or in your chili, can you make a swap where you are changing a little bit the ratio of plant to animal sourced protein? I know that the CIA did a lot of work with that around mushrooms. I tried to bring that to our school, and I know there was a labor issue for chopping all the mushrooms, so then you saved money, but then you spent more on labor. But from what I have understood talking with school lunch professionals, one of the easier swaps is doing a bean or a lentil in there. I think also as nuts, it's really interesting because the allergy conversation around peanuts is changing dramatically. I was just at the American Academy of Pediatrics last weekend, and they are actively pushing their new guidelines, which actually involve early introduction of peanuts and allergens as early as 4 to 6 months, of course in the right form, a powdered form. But at AAP there were tons of products around peanuts and peanut pouches and squeezes for infants and toddlers. So I think in a longer term sense, to answer your question, I think the peanut conversation at the school level, I expect that will change as fewer, hopefully these new allergy guidelines will really move the needle on this peanut allergy in school thing and provide this option for an affordable protein source.
Thank you, Kate. As you can see, the final slide, if you do have any questions that weren't answered, you can email us at the email address on the last slide. Thank you, Ashley and Kate. Great webinar. To all of you who registered, you'll be receiving your resources on Monday. And the webinar will also be up on Ashley and Kate's website or YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks, Matt.